Welcome back, Honors. All right, before y'all start freaking out, you're like, Mom, Dad, he's a joke, he's a phony, he's on Wikipedia. Calm it down, all right? First of all, Wikipedia, not that bad of a source. You should just never cite it, all right? So, because actually, proportionally speaking, it has just as many mistakes on it as the Encyclopedia Britannica, all right? Actually, the same average number. So, all right, so anyway, but also their Wikimedia Commons has like some of the most detailed images of any artwork that I can find. So, because they're like super large and I can zoom in on them and stuff. So I'm going to be using this Wikipedia site right now to try and show you a couple of things about the artwork that's very near and dear to my heart that I was in the same city as and I didn't even get a chance to go see, but it's a personal thing in my life that I'm going to get to go back and see it. I'm going to be talking about the Sistine Chapel ceiling by Michelangelo. So what this video is meant to be is an example of what your Renaissance art presentation should look like. Okay? Are you ready? Okay? Let's go. Okay? So, the Sistine Chapel ceiling is created by Michelangelo. If you want to know, his last name is Buonarroti. All right? So, like, by Michelangelo Buonarroti. And it was created during the High Renaissance period from 1508 to 1512. It took about 4 years to make, right? It's very, very large. The dimensions of it are very hard to take due to the fact that it's got a curvature to it. But if you want something to compare it to, it's about 3/4 of the size of a football field, right? It's absolutely huge, right? The Sistine Chapel ceiling was specifically commissioned and paid for by the Catholic Church during the High Renaissance in the early 1500s, right? Paid specifically by Pope Julius II, right? Now, the thing about the Sistine Chapel itself, it was built, the building itself, the thing that it sits inside of, as I'm about to zoom in right here, the building was built in the early 1400s, around 1408 and not 1408, from about 1477 to about 1480, all right? So it was built as a massive chapel that would actually be home to where the Pope gives Mass every single day, right? Now, originally when this thing was built, a lot of frescoes were added to the walls, right? You had frescoes depicting Moses. You had frescoes of St. Peter receiving the keys from Christ, which I believe that's by Ghirlandaio. You had a massive amount of frescoes in the early Renaissance period when the building was originally built in the 1470s, all right? Now, as time progresses, the building is going to begin to kind of have some structural issues. One of the corners starts to dip on it. And the Pope at the time, Julius II, felt that the ceiling didn't match the amazing artwork that was all over the walls. All right, so this is all the artwork all over the walls. This is St. Peter receiving the keys from Christ. So as you can see, there's frescoes everywhere, and it's a massive building. But the thing that he wanted to focus on redoing was the ceiling. The ceiling, all it had on there was just a starry night sky, a blue sky with a bunch of stars kind of sprinkled all over the top of it, and he wanted it to match the grandeur, right? He wanted the Sistine Chapel ceiling to be much more indicative of the frescoes that were along the walls. So he went off to try and find an artist that could actually do this, right? Now, he originally discusses with one of his friends, Bramante is his name, Donato Bramante, discusses with him, I have to find an artist that's up to snuff enough to be able to actually create a fresco of this caliber on the ceiling. And of course, one of their earliest ideas is like, what about Da Vinci? Well, Da Vinci was actually off in northern Italy, and the church wasn't a big fan of him because of some of his other works. And then he says, well, what about this other guy I have? I'm training him right now. His name's Raphael. He's very, very good at frescoes. I love him. I think he's a great dude. All right, so... And Pope Julius II goes, nah, I don't like that idea. He just doesn't have enough experience yet, right? We'll get him to do some other stuff. We'll get him to do the School of Athens in my library, which one of you have, and we'll get him to do a couple of other works there. You know, we'll get him to do maybe a painting for a different church or something like that. So Donato Bramante is already super annoyed right now. He's very, very annoyed that the Pope's not taking his recommendations. He's not taking his student. He's not taking all these ideas. And then the Pope suggests, well, what about the guy that I have building my tomb? Right? So Julius, being kind of ancient Egyptian pharaoh about it, had hired Michelangelo to create his tomb 30 years before he died. Right? So He was like, I want a massive tomb in a Roman-style sculpture to actually be for me. I want it to be buried inside of something grandiose, right? And Michelangelo's like, you got it, buddy. I love that idea because Michelangelo's biggest thing is a sculptor. So he was excited to be able to try and create a tomb out of pure marble that was gigantic and would represent the Pope's burial place. Well, he said, why don't we use that guy? Bramante agrees with him. But ironically enough, here's why. Bramante agrees with him because Bramante thinks that Michelangelo is an impetuous little turd. He hates him, all right? So he doesn't like him because Michelangelo has been getting crazy, crazy famous off all of his sculptures, right? He had made the Pieta as a headstone. He had made the statue of David to try after somebody threw that piece of marble away, right? Like so, and he was growing in popularity really, really quickly, but he's a sculptor. So Bramante saw this as an opportunity to show the Pope that you should have taken his suggestion in the first place and taken Raphael, because Michelangelo had never successfully done a fresco before, right? Which is what the Sistine Chapel ceiling is. It's a fresco. So they commissioned Michelangelo to create this fresco, right? And in the long run, he creates, to this day, one of the most recognizable artwork creations throughout all of history. The Sistine Chapel ceiling is considered one of the best composed, balanced, and well-made frescoes that the world has ever seen. All right, so far better than The Last Supper by Da Vinci, simply because it's falling apart and Da Vinci did it in the wrong way, tried to put wet paint on dry plaster. It was a bad idea. Considered one of the most anatomically beautiful ones as well. The Sistine Chapel ceiling is gorgeous. Just looking at it, some of you are like, wow, that just seems really confusing. It actually isn't. Originally, Michelangelo had planned for a lot of different ideas, but Pope Julius specifically said, I want certain books of the Bible to be depicted on the ceiling. And so they go with the book of Genesis, right? So the focal point of the entire, let's break it down, focal point, and we'll move out, right? This is how you should be doing your art presentation. Pick an area to start with and then work out, right? So Michelangelo is going to spend 4 years creating one of the most difficult things that he's ever done, right? And ironically enough, when you're reading the Sistine Chapel ceiling, you're supposed to go from this way to this way, but he completed it this way to this way, right? Now, what it is, though, is its central piece is 9 panels from the book of Genesis, all right? So you've got the drunkenness of Noah right here. You've got the flood panel. You've got the Noah at the altar, the expulsion from Eden. You have the creation of Eve. You have the creation of Adam. You have the creation of the earth. You have the creation of the sun and moon. And then you have God separating light and dark, right? So you have these 9 panels that are the central focal point, flanked by frescoed architectural supports, including Romanesque themes with pedestals and figures as well. And then also the medallions that actually depict other scenes from the Old Testament. And then you also have these people called the ignudi, which is just like nude models or nude figures, right? It's supposed to just be another piece of like Roman style art included to flank the rest of the panels itself. Now, to focus on one panel specifically, this one is the most famous one out of all of them. That is the creation of Adam, right? So the creation of Adam is the most duplicated, replicated piece of artwork in the world, all right? This is the fresco piece in the very, very central focal point of the entire ceiling is God reaching out to bestow life upon Adam, right? And divine wisdom upon Adam. Now, this also includes a lot of very, very kitschy things where Michelangelo is trying to kind of poke fun at the human people, right? So, for example, right here, as you can look at Michelangelo drew Adam's arm as kind of limply, like just kind of, as in like he doesn't have any effort and he's not making the true effort that God is making to try and bestow this greatness upon him, right? Showing that people are kind of resistant and opulent to divine inspiration and things like that. Now, also you can see that God is flanked by several figures. This is Mary actually hidden inside, or no, that's Eve actually hidden inside right there. And then Mary is actually posted up behind God. And also many other like famous Old Testament figures, God is actually flying through the air with a giant drape behind him. Now, a lot of art historians believe that this also might have been Michelangelo's attempt to sneak some anatomical things in there, because some people say that God actually looks like a brain, right? Like the human brain actually loping back, and then the stem coming off here. Other art historians have argued he looks like a heart, with actually like the heart angled this way, with the oxygenated blood coming in, and then the red heart itself. Other people have argued that he looks like a womb, but basically trying to argue the fact that he actually looks like anatomical things, right? Like a brain or a heart or a womb or something like that, right? So like I said, just a review, you've got 9 panels, right, from the book of Genesis. You've got so this first section over here is God creating everything, right? It's the first days of creation. So he's separating light from dark right here, as you can see with his hands posted up, and he's pushing light and dark away. You can actually see over here, he's creating the sun and the moon, and then he's flying off right here to create the earth as well. So like this is him flying over the earth to create the sky and the earth, and then of course he's creating Adam. This one right here is him actually pulling Eve out of Adam's rib, so creating Eve as well. And then right here, of course, is the expulsion from Eden. This is Adam and Eve at the tree of knowledge, taking the apple and then being expelled from the Garden of Eden by one of the angels. Here's the serpent wrapped around the tree with this human top half, which I always thought was kind of cool. Here's the sacrifice of the altar of Noah. And then this one, the one that Michelangelo hated the most and took him the longest to do, is the flood. You can actually see where it was damaged right here, because Michelangelo, this is when he was trying to do it early on, and he was going a lot slower because he hadn't got the hang of doing frescoes yet, and he was doing it panel by panel in these things called intonacos. So imagine for a second, like you remember when you were in like a math class when you were younger, and you had to take a picture and draw the grid lines on it and then do all the images in each grid to create a larger and then expanded picture? That's how you got to do a fresco, right? You have to take your image, and then you had to lay down one square, and then you take a piece of paper that's got the design drawn on it, and you punch a bunch of holes on it, and you hit it with like some charcoal dust, basically creating a connect the dots, and then you go in and you actually create your design, right? You're like, and then you actually go on there, and it's a time trial. You got to hurry up and do it before the plaster dries, right? Well, on this section, the plaster began to what was called effervesce, right? Actually, the salt began to like protrude out of it, and then that salt caused a massive mildew problem, and it molded, right? And so this piece actually came crashing down to the floor, and this was their weak attempt to actually try and repair it. So, but yeah, that's one of the panels he absolutely hated. Now, also included in this one, all of the figures that surround, like, so these guys right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, the ones sitting on these pedestals, are people that are relatives of Christ or other major Old Testament heroes. For example, my favorite one is all the way down here. This is Jonah, and he's actually next to one of the fish from the whale's stomach, but he's actually looking up towards the sky. And then you also have Moses is over here somewhere. I can never remember where he is. But yeah, so Ezekiel is right here. So you've got a ton of other figures. And then you have Old Testament scenes in these areas called the lunettes. For example, that is the Archangel Michael destroying Satan. And this is my favorite like little lunette, and the last fact I'll leave you on when I'm talking about the Sistine Chapel ceiling. This is Michelangelo's self-portrait. So again, a quick review, 9 panels, Book of Genesis. Creation of Adam is the most popularized one. It's a fresco. Took him a long time. Also, really, really big urban myth about this thing is that he laid on his back and did it like this. He actually had to stand like this and actually angle his neck upward. He actually had permanent neck damage after actually completing this whole thing. And also paint and plaster was dripping into his face the whole time. He actually scratched his cornea a few different times as well. But I could talk about this thing for days, and all of your artworks have not nearly as much information because this thing is humongous and it's got so many figures in it, right? But last little fun fact about the whole thing is that actually Michelangelo, this is his self-portrait in it. He actually depicted himself as a head on a tray because he actually was a very, very melancholy, forlorn, very sad figure. All he ever wanted to do was just work in his workshop. He never wanted to talk to people. He also, we believe, was probably clinically depressed, right? So Michelangelo, what he did is he reached back into the Old Testament and he used the story of Judith and Holofernes as the panel that he would actually paint his self-portrait inside of. Judith and Holofernes is a very famous story because Holofernes is a Assyrian general, right? And he takes over a Jewish village outside of Canaan, and he sees the murder of all of these Jewish men. He causes a diaspora, and many run away. Well, Judith refused to run away. And as a noble Jewish woman, she decides she's going to take the land back and she's going to destroy these invaders. So she decides to set her sights on Holofernes, the Assyrian general. So he gets a little bit too wishy-washy from partying too much, and Judith actually seduces him, right? And while he's passed out, right, completely vulnerable, no armor, right, naked, she gets her maid to come in there with her, and then she takes a sword and she cuts off his head, right? So that's Holofernes' dead body. That's Judith right there, and this is her maid. Michelangelo drew himself as Holofernes' severed head on the plate right there. So as you can see, the Sistine Chapel ceiling is absolutely beautiful. It's amazing. It's got some damage to it to this day because of all the candles that burned in it for so long. You can't use flash photography on it or else it'll damage the fresco. But just like, look at the detail. It's absolutely ridiculous, right? You've got all these different imagery and all these different people and all these different things and the spindles and the lunettes. And I've actually got, if any of you are actually pretty interested in this, I have an entire book by Ross King. It's called Michelangelo and the Pope's Ceiling. It actually goes into depth about this entire piece. And like I said, I could talk about this thing for days, but I'm not going to take up your entire break. You didn't need to take any notes on that. This is just an example of what an artwork presentation is supposed to look like, all right? If y'all have any questions while you're looking your stuff up, you get one note card, all right? One note card while you're actually up there, front and back, that you can use, and your assignments are actually up on Google Classroom, okay? Also, on Monday, if you are curious about if you have enough information or if you're hitting on enough stuff, please let me know, and I'll help you guys out before your presentations start on Tuesday, all right? So when we come back from break, we're going to go ahead and get started, all right? But just look up everything you can find and focus on the symbolism and focus on the characters inside of it, why they were placed there, the use of color, what these different images mean. Why are there oranges in this? Why does Cupid have a blindfold? Why did he do this rhinoceros? Did he ever see the rhinoceros? Why is the knight looking this way? Like, why is this lady standing on this shell naked? You know what I mean? Like, there's all kinds of them, right? So I'm going to go ahead and leave it here. I hope you all have a great break. I'll see you guys later. Have a good one.